Should you buy a used Nissan Leaf in July 2023? Well, it's time for another used market review. The last one was on the Renault Zoe, and if you haven't seen that yet, there's a link in the description and you should definitely go and watch it after this, because there are some real bargains out there if the Zoe takes your fancy. The EV used market is extremely attractive if you're a buyer right now. Not so much if you're a dealer, of course, because prices have fallen quite significantly and some people have been left holding some hot potatoes in their stock. But we are definitely moving way away from where we used to be, where used cars were changing hands for very, very close to what they cost new, and there are some real bargains coming out. And the point in this series of videos is to identify what the used market looks like for a given model if you happen to be in the market for a decent value second-hand EV. There's a strong rhetoric around at the moment about how it's a terrible thing that EVs are depreciating so much. Well, maybe if you're the first buyer, but if you're someone looking to pick up a second-hand bargain, well, it can only be a good thing. EVs can't both be completely unaffordable and depreciate too much, because that doesn't really tally up, does it? If they depreciate too much, that means they'll be very affordable on the second-hand market. The Nissan Leaf then, it came to market in 2011 and in my mind was the start of it all, because it was a proper family car that just happened to be electric. Yes, it's a bit weird and wonderful. The styling of the Mark I Leaf definitely tried to be a bit more out there. Not so much maybe as something like the Mitsubishi i-MiEV, although they were available with petrol power as well. They weren't just full electric. But for me, the Leaf was the first sort of proper, actual, usable family hatchback with an electric drivetrain. And I think you really can pin an awful lot on the Leaf for getting us where we are today, where the electric car isn't just in obscurity and nobody really wants one, but you have the odd, like, crazy early adopter that's a bit interested in technology might buy one, to moving rapidly towards the mainstream where we are today. You can still buy a brand new Leaf today if you want to, though it's probably on borrowed time in Nissan's lineup, I would say. Obviously the Ariya being their latest electric car that's sort of superseding the Leaf, although it's, you know, a typically fairly massive SUV. It's not really a replacement for the Leaf if you ask me. I drove a Mark II Leaf last year at GridServe. If you want to check out that video, there's a link in the description to see what I thought of the Mark II 40 kilowatt hour Leaf. I actually really liked it and I thought there was definitely a place in the market for it, so do check that out if you like, if you haven't seen it already. An awful lot of people start their EV journey with a Leaf, whether that be those crazy early adopters that bought one in 2011 and got hooked and have been driving EVs ever since, or people today that buy one secondhand because it's cheap, like some of the ones we're going to look at now, and then that becomes almost like a gateway drug into more and more expensive EVs. You might remember, if you've been following the channel for a little while, that back in 2021 I bought a £2,600 Mark I Leaf, one of the Japanese built cars that we'll talk about in a bit. I picked that up on behalf of a friend for £2,600. He used that for about a year and ordered a brand new Leaf 62 kilowatt hour because an electric car was such a good fit for them, and they got so used to it, him and his family, that the replacement had to be electric, but you just needed something with a bit more range than this old Mark I Leaf that could only maybe do 40-50 miles nowadays with its degraded battery. But for him, the cheap Mark I Leaf was a brilliant introduction to see just how electric motoring would work for him. And I think a lot of people find themselves in that situation, and they'll do so with a Leaf. Like most long-running models, the Leaf has several battery sizes linked to age. You have a 24 kilowatt hour pack and a 30 kilowatt hour pack in the Mark I, and a 40 kilowatt hour and 62 kilowatt hour in the Mark II. The Mark I Leaf uses Type 1 connectors for charging. It's an old standard that's now defunct that you won't really find anybody talking about anymore, but there's no real worry about compatibility. You can use a Type 2 to Type 1 cable in order to charge it from a typical home charger or like a pod point at Tesco or something like that. Or you can get a Type 2 to Type 1 adapter to put on the end of your tethered charger if you've gone down that route. A 3.3 kilowatt onboard AC charger was standard on the Mark I, and 6.6 was an optional extra. So do look out for that when you're looking at these second-hand cars, because with the 3.3, obviously it's going to charge quite slowly, not much quicker than using a 3-pin plug to charge a car, so might not be ideal. Depends on how many miles you do, of course. All of the Mark IIs have 6.6 chargers on board, so you don't need to worry about that if it's the Mark II car that you're looking at. And all Leafs use Chademo for rapid charging. Much like with the Zoe, the Leaf was available for a brief period of time with a leased battery. It's very rare though. Nissan actually led with the owned battery first and foremost and offered the battery lease to try and keep the asking prices down, because obviously the list price was a lot lower if you weren't actually purchasing the battery, but it was on a lease. It's worth checking for if you're buying an early Leaf to make sure it's not battery lease, but it is pretty rare. In all honesty, I would probably stay away from it if you did find a battery lease car, because unlike the Zoe, it really isn't par for the course with them, and you might find that sort of resaleability, not so much the value, but whether you'll actually find a buyer for it or not, might be a bit of an issue. Now, I'm sure you'll be able to buy the lease out if you want to, but in all honesty, I would probably just stay away from them completely. This was totally gone by the time the Mark II Leaf came in. Might even have been gone with a 30 kilowatt hour battery, I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments if you know what happened to the battery lease with the Leaf. The next thing we'll need to talk about if we're talking about a Leaf is Chademo, of course, and that is the charging connector used for DC rapid charging on the Leaf instead of CCS. Nissan are still building Leafs with it. A brand new Leaf still uses Chademo, but the Ariya now uses CCS, which is widely adopted as the European standard for rapid charging. Nobody is making cars in Europe with any other type of connector. It will be CCS. So that means, unfortunately, that some charging providers aren't actually installing new rapid chargers with Chademo connectors. Lots still are. GridServe have said that they are completely committed to supporting Chademo and continually supporting Chademo. However, what you will find at some of their new sites, there are less and less connectors going in. So they're still deploying them, there's still support for them, but you find that there's many more CCS only chargers. It's worth thinking about, and it's probably worth thinking about what routes you take that might mean you'd need to rapid charge, and making sure you can get access to a Chademo connector. I don't think it's a deal breaker, and I talked about this quite a lot when I reviewed the Mark II Leaf. I don't think it would put me off, but it's worth bearing in mind. And the final thing we need to think about with the Leaf is battery degradation. It seems particularly prone to it. Obviously, all lithium-ion batteries degrade, but the Leaf does seem a little bit worse than some other EVs. It doesn't have any kind of real thermal management for the battery. It's sort of passive thermal management, and that does seem to lead to it degrading a little bit quicker than some others. What's interesting is it does seem to degrade a bit faster than the Zoe, which also has passive thermal management and doesn't have sort of liquid cooling or anything like that. So I don't know why that is. There's an indication on the dash on the Mark I Leaf of battery health. You'll hear people talking about bars. Oh, that one's got 12 bars, that one's got 10 bars. And that is this indication of battery health that you get in the Leaf. This should give you an indication of how much charge the battery can hold versus what it could when it was new. If you're seeing a Leaf with a super low sort of state of health, i.e. not very many bars, they're probably best avoided unless they are really, really cheap, because you really are going to struggle in terms of range. It can be reset back to 12 bars for a very brief period of time if you've got the right equipment to do so. So do be really suspicious of an old or high mileage Leaf that's showing 12 bars and doesn't show any degradation at all. There's something dodgy about that, almost certainly. There's an app called Leaf Spy, which you can use with an OBD dongle to read an actual percentage state of health from the battery. And I'd recommend doing that if you can, especially if you're buying one privately, where they're not going to stand behind the battery health. Obviously, if you buy from a dealer, there's more obligation for them to do so. But a private seller doesn't need to give you any kind of warranty, any kind of comeback, anything like that. So if you can use Leaf Spy, the OBD dongles are pretty cheap. I would recommend that you do that to check out the health of the battery. Let's hit the classifieds then, and obviously this is my favourite part of these videos. Let's see how crap a bottom of the market car I can find. So we'll start with the earliest Leafs, of course, the Japanese built ones, and these will be 2011, 2012, 2013 models. You can always tell them apart from the ones that were built in Sunderland because they have this crazy light coloured interior. Now it's actually really nice. You sit in, it feels like such a light and airy cabin. I really, really like it, even if it wouldn't be everybody's choice in terms of colour. But that is how you tell them apart, because all the Japanese built cars had these light coloured interiors. And they also had an electronic parking brake, whereas the later Sunderland built cars had a good old fashioned manual handbrake, which is probably what you want in terms of maintenance, much simpler. The electronic parking brake, if it goes wrong, can be quite expensive. £3,500 seems to be the going rate at the moment at the bottom of the market for the Leaf. And I struggle a little bit with that. Bearing in mind I bought that one a couple of years ago for £2,600, I struggle with the fact we're a couple of years on and they're now £3,500 for basically the same car in the same kind of condition with a pretty degraded battery. But that's the market we're in. I mean, not so long ago when prices were absolutely crazy, folk were readily asking £5,500 for these cars and were seemingly selling them. So it's not just that they were asking for that, the people were actually paying it, which is crazy. This private sale with 67,000 miles on the clock seems like pretty good value for money at first glance. Really kind of tidy, £3,500, happy days. But if you take a bit of a closer look, it has 6 bars. That is a seriously degraded battery, and I mean, it's not going to be much use. Yeah, okay, if you're just using it to nip around town, it'll be alright, but you can probably do better. This one here looks significantly healthier with 9 bars, and it shows a range on the guessometer in the photo of 60 miles. But I think we are scraping the bottom of the barrel. You've got to really want the cheapest Leaf you can find, I think, to be bothering with these ones. There's still a few people out there asking £5,000 for these 11 reg cars as well, and I think they are absolutely living the dream world. I just don't think at any point is a Japanese-built 2011 Leaf with a meh battery worth £5,000. It just isn't. This Sunderland-built 15 reg one at £5,000 looks like better value, although it's not clear from the photos how healthy the battery is. So you would definitely want to check it out, and that's always the thing. I'm always a bit wary of a Leaf advert where there isn't a photo of the dashboard, because that usually means that it's pretty low on bars and they're not wanting to show you that. £5,000 actually brings you into the 30 kilowatt hour battery as well, which is arguably the better buy, right? This one at £5,060 has 10 bars, so pretty healthy battery, a 65 reg with 70,000 miles on the clock. That looks pretty good to me, and I think as we creep into the 30 kilowatt hour car, it seems like there are actually some cleaner, nicer cars for the same kind of money. I think would be aiming for a 30 kilowatt hour car for this kind of money rather than buying a 24 for £5,000 to £6,000. And there is actually a couple of others for that kind of money too. And then in a sea of £5,500, £6,000 24s, I think the 30 actually represents pretty good value for money. Much like with the Zoe though, I think the real value in the Leaf stands out with these newer cars, the 40 kilowatt hour model. You can start with this one if you like. 18 plate, clearly an ex-taxi. It's been very busy indeed with 141,000 miles on the clock. But at £8,500, it certainly caught my attention. I'm not actually 100% sure how you see the battery health on the Mark II. Looking at the dash, I'm not 100% sure if it has a visual indication like the Mark I does. It's not as obvious at least, so you'll probably want to get Leaf Spy on it to see what kind of state of health we're seeing. But I am led to believe the 40 doesn't degrade as quickly or as drastically as the 24 or the 30. So I think that the fact that it's got a better pack to start with, and you do have age on your side with it being a 2018, I think I wouldn't be too scared of an ex-taxi showing high mileage. I think it could actually be a goer. This one here looks like the real bargain though, if you ask me. 67 reg, 44,000 on the clock, and it's £9,500. It says in the description that it has a smallish dent on the rear quarter, but rather helpfully, there isn't any photos of it. So, I mean, obviously it could be all caved in, but as long as it's not too bad and it drives all right, well, that seems like really good value for money to me. No indication that it's categorised, it hasn't been written off for whatever damage it has, so could be worth a punt. If you're not quite brave enough for that though, add another £1,000, at £10,500 will get you this one from Drive Green, who are a fairly respected independent. A bit higher mileage at 77,000, but plenty of life left in it, and I think it looks like pretty good value. Or how about this one? 19 reg from a car supermarket with a staggeringly low 11,000 miles. £11,000 to you, and that actually seems like pretty good value as well. If only approved used from Nissan is going to do you though, they start at about 11,500 for this one with 65,000 miles, and 13,000 will get you into this one with half of that on the clock. If range really is your be-all and end-all though, and you cannot face the prospect of not having the maximum amount of range you possibly can, well, it'll be the 62 kilowatt hour battery you'll be after. 11,995 will get you this, again, ex-taxi, probably 120,000 miles on the clock on a 20 reg. So it's been really busy. And, I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing I'd be looking at. It definitely gets my attention straight away. But back in the real world where people make sensible decisions and you're going to be spending just under £17,000 on these low mileage 70 reg cars from Nissan main dealers, approved used. I mean, it's still an awful lot of car for the money if you need that bigger battery to meet your requirements. But what do you think? Would you be better off saving a couple of grand and just going for the 40 kilowatt hour? Or would that bigger battery pack and the prospect of less charging make you plump the extra for the 62? I think I'd definitely entertain the 12 grand high mileage one, but I don't think, if we're looking at on the low mileage space, I don't think the extra 4 or 5 grand for the 62 would tempt me out of a clean 40 for that kind of money. Let me know what you think. Would any of these Leafs catch your eye? I certainly think there's a lot of value on display at the moment, and again, maybe at the low end of the market, you know, the sort of 5-6 grand, yeah, you're really going to want one, if you know what I mean. But if you've got 10, 11, 12 to spend, I think what you actually see is quite a lot of pretty modern electric car for the money. But what would you buy? If you had a 5, 10, 15 grand budget, would the Leaf be your choice? Or would it be something else? Let me know in the comments. Does Chademo put you off? And is that for you, is that the reason why the Leaf isn't even getting a look in? Is it Chademo because CCS is king? But that's it for this used market review anyway. If the Leaf doesn't quite do it for you, make sure you subscribe with notifications turned on so that you don't miss out on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.